Good morning, everyone. So, another week has passed in a chaotic and ever changing world. And we are once again able to come together to worship our Lord and remember what He gave up for us through the taking of the bread and the wine. But before that, I've been given the privilege of putting together some thoughts to hopefully help each and every one of you be strengthened in our walk to the kingdom. So, I'd like to talk about examples and responsibility, and how we are being an example of Christ in our day-to-day lives. Now, since I've had the privilege of the roller coaster called parenthood, I have come to realize just how important setting a good example is, as I always have four little sets of eyes watching and learning from everything I do. And I am responsible for how those little boys will turn out. I'm their role model, and I will have to answer for all of their behaviors and their habits that they learn from me. This is a massive responsibility. Every little characteristic that we display is being watched, and everything we see is usually a learned habit from watching somebody else. It's not necessarily something that we realize at the time. It's usually something that happens over an extended period. I remember reading one of those inspirational articles, and it started off with this little example. A husband saw his wife cutting the end off a roast before putting it in the oven. And he asked her, "Why do you do that?" Her answer was, "I don't know, my mum always did it." So they rang her mum to ask her. And her mum's answer was, "I don't know either, your grandmother always did it." So they rang their grandmother to find out why, and her answer was this: "When we were younger, the ovens weren't that big, and cutting the end off was the only way to fit the roast in the oven." 2 generations later, and they were still doing the same thing, because this is what they saw. Almost every behavior that we see in the world right now came from somewhere. At some point, someone needs to stand up and take responsibility and say enough is enough. Christ did this for us, and He ultimately paid the price. But He did this willingly, as He knew it was all part of God's plan. We all need to take this attitude in our day-to-day lives as we go to work, because our actions and behavior are setting an example for everyone who is watching. They are seeing we are different, and hopefully our actions can start to show them the right way. This is how we can stand up like Christ and say behaviors that are normalized in this world are wrong. I can with confidence say that I am part of the problem in the world. We are all guilty of it. Why? Because we are human. It is in our nature, and in this age, it is even harder to distance ourselves from the horrible things that go on around us. Everything that we see in the world, it's nothing new. It has always been there, but it is so much easier to see and access with the different forms of media and technology that we have access to. Things like the police brutality that we're always seeing in America, domestic violence, people being mistreated by others who think they are more entitled, and even more recently, the ramifications of the COVID-19 virus. This is nothing new, but the only difference now is that it is being more videoed, more documented, and blown out of proportion by the media. People are now speaking up, and these are the things that we are constantly seeing. Now, I like to think that there are no such things as bad teams or bad families. There are only bad leaders. Now, we are privileged that we have an awesome leader to look up to, Christ. So if we look at our reading from this morning in 1 Kings chapter 2, we can see David at the end of his life still doing everything that he can to set an example for his son Solomon. If we look in the first verses in 2 to 3, it says, "I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man. and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. So we can see just how much David cared for his son. He wanted him to walk in the ways of God and to be a humble king, seeking God's guidance often. This is a good lesson for all of us to think about, as we should all be striving to follow in the footsteps of David, in Solomon, and ultimately Christ. So if we come to verse 45 in 1 Kings chapter 2, it says, "And King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever." So we see here that King Solomon listened to his father's guidance, and he constantly confided in the Lord. And because of that, the line of David will be rewarded. I'd like to jump forward to the New Testament, to the time of Christ's crucifixion, where we can find multiple examples of Christ's attitude to those around him, and we can see exactly why he was the chosen Son of God. So if we all turn to Luke chapter 22, we see here Christ and his disciples are in the Garden of Gethsemane. It is the night before his crucifixion, and Christ has just finished praying to God, begging him not to go through. But ultimately, he took full responsibility and was happy to go through with his Father's plan. In verses 50 and 51, we are showing just how forgiving Christ is. "And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far. And he touched his ear and healed him." So one of his disciples was defending his Lord. His instincts took over, and he attacked one of the people that came to take his Lord away. This isn't the right attitude to have, but it's part of our nature, and he acted on instincts. Now, Christ showed a perfect example to his disciples. He healed one of the men who came to take him away to die. He was accepting full responsibility for his Father's plan. If we come across to Luke 23 in verse 34, another perfect example for us. Christ has been beaten, he has been mocked, and he has had thorns shoved on his head. And his response is, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This goes to show his true amazing character and exactly why he was God's chosen son. I know for a fact that I would not be able to have this kind of attitude to people that were doing this sort of thing. So, how do we start taking responsibility for our actions and change the way that we live to demonstrate we are different and to set examples? Well, would you follow you? This simple question is quite sobering. The actions and behaviors that we demonstrate each day, would you be happy if your children were copying these? What do you think everyone in your workplace would think? We have two choices every single day. We can struggle each day to be different, not always fitting in, but living a godly life as best as we can. Or we can fit right in, go against everything that God stands for and everything that we believe in. Choose wisely. In the last 2 years, we have survived devastating fires and massive floods. We're now in the midst of a worldwide pandemic that is really testing our faith. We don't know what is going to happen on a day-to-day basis. It's a key time in all our lives where our reactions and responses to the massive changes that we are having to deal with, like lockdowns and restrictions, our freedom being taken away, and time limits when we're allowed in and out of our homes, who we can and can't see, or whether or not we are allowed to work to provide for our families. Our reactions are going to stand out to those who are watching. For some of us, that's our neighbors or our work colleagues if we are able to go to work still. For others, it's our friends and family that we have on the many social media platforms we have access to. For some of us, it is our kids who we're trying to raise to be better versions of ourselves. Most importantly, it is God. He is watching everything that we do and every single example that we set for those around us. We are all responsible for our actions and the outcomes from them. Because when the time comes for us to be judged and we step up to Christ and he asks us, why did you choose to stop believing? Why did your children drift away from the ecclesia? Do you really want your answer to be because it was easier to fit in? It was just easier to go along with the world instead of setting the right example. This is a very sobering thought and a situation I hope we never have to be in. I want to see each and every one of you standing with me and my family in the kingdom. So, we all have a choice to jump out of the plane of life head on and take responsibility and set a great example for those around us. Or we can tiptoe along in life and never take that leap of faith. So as we come to the most important part of our memorial, the taking of the bread and wine, a symbol of our Lord's body and blood that he gave willingly for us. I want you to think about this. What choice will you make?